I woke up in a hospital bed with tubes running from my arms and a machine beeping beside me. The ceiling tiles blurred as I blinked against the fluorescent lights. My chest ached like someone had parked a truck on it. A heart attack, the nurse told me. 58 years old, and my body had finally called timeout on decades of manual labor and stress. My first thought was Daniel, my only son. I fumbled for my phone on the bedside table, my fingers clumsy and weak. The screen showed 3 missed calls from work, but nothing from him. I dialed his number, listening to it ring once, twice, 3 times before going to voicemail. "Danny, it's Dad," I said, my voice scratchy. "I'm at Memorial Hospital. Had a heart attack last night. Room 412. Could really use you here, son." I hung up and waited. An hour passed. Then 2. The nurse came in to check my vitals, her face kind but practiced at hiding pity. "Has my son called?" I asked. She hesitated. "Actually, yes. He answered when we called your emergency contact number this morning." Relief flooded through me. "When is he coming?" Her expression shifted. "He said he was busy with work. Asked us to tell you to text him instead." The afternoon sun cut through the hospital blinds in sharp lines across my blanket. I stared at my phone, at Daniel's name in my contacts, at the message I'd typed and deleted 4 times. Outside my room, I could hear the sounds of a functioning hospital. Carts rolling, voices calling, life continuing without pause. A knock interrupted my thoughts. A volunteer pushed open the door, carrying a large bouquet of white lilies and blue hydrangeas. My favorite flowers, the ones my late wife, Catherine, used to plant every spring in our garden. "These just arrived for you, Mr. Hensley," the volunteer said cheerfully, setting them on the window ledge. My throat tightened. Danny remembered. Despite everything, he remembered. I reached for the card with shaking hands, pulling it from its tiny envelope. "Get well soon, Dad. Love, Daniel." But something felt wrong. I stared at the handwriting, neat, careful loops that looked nothing like my son's hasty scrawl. Daniel had always written like a doctor, quick and illegible. This was someone else's hand. "Excuse me." I called to the volunteer before she left. "Who dropped these off?" She checked her clipboard. "A woman named Olivia." She said she was a neighbor. Olivia Turner lived 3 houses down from me on Maple Street. She'd moved in 2 years ago with her teenage daughter after her divorce. We'd exchanged pleasantries over mailboxes and shared tools across property lines, but she'd never visited me in a hospital before. The nurse helped me sit up straighter when Olivia appeared in my doorway that evening, holding a thermos of soup. "I hope you don't mind," she said, her voice gentle. "I heard from your mail carrier that you were here. Thought you might need something besides hospital food." "The flowers," I said. "That was you." She nodded, settling into the visitor's chair. "I didn't want you to feel alone. I called Daniel yesterday when I heard. He picked up, but what?" She looked uncomfortable. "He said he'd reach out when he had time." Then he hung up. My phone buzzed on the bedside table. Finally, I grabbed it too quickly. Hope and frustration tangled in my chest. The message was short. "Can we do this later? Big quarter at work. Need to focus." I set the phone down carefully, my hands steadier than my voice. "Thank you for the flowers, Olivia." The hospital discharged me 3 days later with a stack of prescriptions and instructions to avoid stress. Stress. As if I could control that. I rode home in a taxi, watching familiar streets pass by through the window. The driver helped me to my front door, accepted his fare, and drove away, leaving me alone on the porch I'd built with my own hands 30 years ago. Inside, everything looked the same, but felt different. The house seemed larger, emptier. I set my keys on the hall table and noticed something immediately. A glossy real estate packet sitting on my kitchen counter where I definitely hadn't left it. I picked it up with growing dread. Premier Assisted Living Communities, read the cover. Post-it notes mark specific pages showing 1-bedroom apartments with emergency call buttons and communal dining halls. On top, a handwritten note in Daniel's unmistakable scrawl. "Dad, we need to talk about this house. You shouldn't be living alone anymore. Assisted living makes sense. Let's list the property this spring." My phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. "Mr. Hensley? This is Bradley Frost from Frost Estate Planning. Your son, Daniel, contacted us about setting up a consultation regarding your assets and living situation. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in Catherine's old chair by the window, looking out at the street we'd chosen together 40 years ago. Young and broke, we bought this rundown house and rebuilt it room by room. She'd been gone for 6 years now, and some days the silence still felt like drowning. I pulled down the photo albums from the hall closet, flipping through pages of memories. Daniel as a baby, Daniel's first day of school, Daniel graduating college. The photos stopped around the time he got his finance job in the city. After that, visits became phone calls. Phone calls became texts. Texts became silence interrupted by requests. Catherine's Bible sat on the bookshelf where she'd left it. I opened to a passage she'd underlined in Proverbs. A good person leaves an inheritance for their children's children, but a sinner's wealth is stored up for the righteous. I'd always thought that meant leaving Daniel money. But sitting there at 3 in the morning, my chest still aching, I wondered if I'd been reading it wrong. By dawn, I'd made a decision. No yelling. No dramatic confrontations. Just quiet action. I picked up my phone and scrolled to a number I hadn't called in years. Ellen Park's law office occupied the second floor of a brick building downtown. I'd known her for 20 years. She'd handled Catherine's estate and my business papers back when I ran my carpentry shop. Her hair had gone gray since I'd last seen her, but her handshake was still firm. "Walter," she said warmly, gesturing to a chair. "It's been too long. What can I do for you?" I told her everything. The heart attack, Daniel's absence, the real estate packet, and the attorney he'd contacted without my knowledge. She listened without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. "First things first," Ellen said when I finished. "You're of sound mind and body, while recovering body. That's important. Do you have a current will?" "From 15 years ago. Everything goes to Daniel automatically." She nodded. "Let's update that. And I'm going to suggest something else. A revocable living trust with specific provisions." Over the next 2 hours, we rebuilt my entire estate plan. I told Ellen about the volunteer work I'd done for years at the community rebuild nonprofit, framing houses for families in need. I told her about Olivia's kindness. And I told her what I wanted Daniel to understand. "Can you do that?" I asked when I'd finished explaining my vision. Ellen smiled. "I can. And I think it's brilliant." Pastor Jim hadn't changed much since I'd last swung a hammer at the rebuild site 3 years ago. Still tall, still strong, still wearing the same work boots he'd probably owned for a decade. We met at Rosie's Diner on Thursday morning, sliding into a booth by the window. "Walter Hensley," he said, gripping my hand. "Heard you had a scare. How are you feeling?" "Like I've got unfinished business," I replied. I explained my idea, a skills-based volunteer program that would teach young people carpentry, plumbing, electrical work. Real trades that could change lives. Pastor Jim listened, his coffee growing cold as I talked. "We could use someone with your experience," he said. "Most of our volunteers have heart, but no training. You could build something permanent here, Walter. That's what I'm hoping." He studied me. "This is about your son, isn't it?" I didn't answer directly. If someone wanted to learn what it means to build instead of just buy, could they do that here? Pastor Jim smiled slowly. They could, but they'd have to show up and do the work. No shortcuts. "Good," I said. "That's what I need." I noticed the signs when I got home. Small things. The drawer where I kept important papers sat slightly open when I always closed it completely. My filing cabinet showed fingerprints on the handle. In the bedroom, my closet door wasn't quite shut. Then I found it, on my desk, partially hidden under some mail. A handwritten list in Daniel's distinctive block letters. Possible items for estate sale. Grandfather clock, $800 to $1,200. Crystal set, $300. Dad's tool collection, vintage record player, wedding china. He'd used the emergency key, let himself in while I was in the hospital, and inventoried my possessions like I was already dead. I sat down heavily, the paper trembling in my hands. Not from anger. I was past anger. This was something colder. Clarity. I called a locksmith that afternoon. By evening, I had new locks and a simple door chime that would alert me if anyone entered while I was home. No confrontation. No accusations. Just boundaries. When Daniel texted that night, asking if I had thought about the assisted living idea, I replied with 5 words, "I'm thinking about a lot of things." Daniel's next move came through his wife, Vanessa. She called on a Tuesday, her voice sweet and concerned in that way that always preceded a request. "Walter, we're worried about you living alone. Daniel mentioned you seemed confused when he visited last week." He hadn't visited last week. He'd let himself in with a key he shouldn't have had. "I'm thinking clearly," I said. "Of course you are. But wouldn't it be smart to have a professional evaluation? Just for peace of mind?" Daniel knows an excellent doctor who specializes in elderly care. Elderly care. I was 58, not 80. I made my own appointment instead. Dr. Phillips at Memorial ran a full cognitive assessment. Memory tests, problem-solving tasks, neurological checks. 2 hours of proving I could still think straight. The results came back perfect. Dr. Phillips smiled as he handed me the report. "Your mind is sharp as ever, Walter. Whatever you're planning, you've got full capacity to do it." I made 3 copies. One for my records, one for Ellen, and one that I mailed to Daniel with a short handwritten note. "I'm fine. Let's have dinner. Your choice of restaurant." "Dad." We met at Miller's Diner, a place we'd gone to when Daniel was young, and I'd treat him to pancakes after Little League games. He arrived 15 minutes late, checking his phone as he slid into the booth across from me. "Thanks for coming," I said. He ordered coffee without looking at the waitress. "So, did you get the evaluation? Are you satisfied now?" "I'm healthy. The doctors confirmed it." "Great." He stirred sugar into his coffee aggressively. "So, can we talk about practical things now? That house is too big for you. The market's strong. You could clear $300,000 easily, and assisted living would give you security." "I don't want to sell." His jaw tightened. "Dad, I don't have time to keep bailing you out. Do you know how many calls I've gotten from your neighbors? From hospitals? I have a career, responsibilities. You're being stubborn. I'm being independent. You're being a boomer." He practically spat the word. "Holding on to property you can't maintain, refusing help, making everything harder than it needs to be. I'm tired of carrying dead weight." The waitress appeared with our food. I thanked her. Daniel didn't acknowledge her existence. I ate my sandwich slowly while he complained about his workload, his mortgage, his irritation at having to deal with all this. When the check came, I picked it up with a steady hand and paid. Olivia knocked on my door Saturday morning, holding a casserole dish and wearing a hesitant expression. "I owe you an explanation," she said. "About the flowers." I invited her in, making coffee while she settled at my kitchen table. "I saw Daniel's car that day," she admitted. "The day before your heart attack. He was here for maybe 10 minutes, then left. When I heard you were in the hospital, I called him. He brushed me off so coldly that I couldn't let you wake up to nothing. So you sent flowers and signed his name." "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have lied." I shook my head. "You showed me more kindness than my own son. Don't apologize for that." We talked for an hour. She told me about her divorce, about raising her daughter alone, about the neighbors who'd helped her when she had nothing. I told her about Catherine, about building this house, about teaching Daniel to hammer nails when he was 6 years old. When she left, I called Ellen and added 2 names to my trust documents. Olivia Turner and the Community Rebuild nonprofit. Not everything, but enough to say thank you to people who understood what family actually meant. The text I sent Daniel was simple. "Rebuild project this Saturday. Pastor Jim is leading it. I'm matching donations 10 to 1. Want to come swing a hammer like old times?" His response came 3 hours later. "I donate stock, not sweat. That's more efficient. You should understand ROI, Dad. Return on investment." He'd reduced everything to a spreadsheet. I sent back a thumbs-up emoji and nothing else. Saturday morning, I drove to the rebuild site in my old pickup. The project was a 2-bedroom house for a single mother and her kids. 20 volunteers showed up, ranging from teenagers to retirees. Pastor Jim handed me a hammer, and for 6 hours, I framed walls and hung drywall, my hands remembering skills my body had almost forgotten. My chest ached by lunchtime, but my heart felt lighter than it had in months. On the drive home, I passed Daniel's neighborhood. Big houses with perfect lawns and 3-car garages. I'd helped him with his down payment 7 years ago. $20,000 I'd saved for retirement. I kept driving and didn't look back. My 1972 Ford pickup had been my pride for 30 years. Cherry red, Rebuilt engine, not a spot of rust. Catherine used to joke it was my girlfriend. I turned down offers from collectors for years. On Monday, I listed it for sale. The buyer showed up Wednesday, a young guy named Tommy who'd just started his own landscaping business and needed a reliable work truck. He ran his hands over the hood like he was touching something sacred. My grandfather had one just like this, he said. I'll take care of her. I know you will. The money, $12,000, went straight into an endowment fund Ellen helped me establish. The Catherine Hensley Memorial Scholarship for trade school students. It would help 2 kids a year learn carpentry or plumbing or electrical work. Real skills that couldn't be outsourced or downsized. Ellen recorded the deed. The scholarship was permanent now, lasting long after I was gone. Daniel noticed the missing truck within days. His text was furious. Where's the Ford? That truck was worth serious money. What are you thinking? I replied. I'm thinking about what matters. The phone call came from an unknown number Tuesday afternoon. Professional. Female. Cold. Mr. Hensley, this is Pamela Chun from Anderson Legal Group. We're calling on behalf of your son, Daniel Hensley, regarding concerns about your recent financial decisions and capacity to manage your affairs. I have an attorney, I said calmly. Yes, but Daniel feels it would be prudent to discuss durable power of attorney arrangements before any further, shall we say, impulsive actions occur. My attorney is Ellen Park. All communication should go through her. I hung up and immediately called Ellen. She listened to my account, then asked for the number. I'll handle this, she said, her voice sharp. They're testing boundaries. We'll shut that down. An hour later, she called back. I sent them a formal letter. Essentially, Mr. Hensley has legal counsel, full cognitive capacity, and any further contact outside proper channels will be considered harassment. Daniel's response came that night. You've chosen sides. Fine. Don't come crying to me when you need help. I didn't respond. Some arguments weren't worth having. I spent Saturday afternoon writing a letter by hand on Catherine's old stationery. 3 pages, single-spaced, saying everything I'd kept inside for years. About what it meant to be a father. About work and worth, and the difference between price and value. I sealed it in an envelope and wrote on the front, to my son, when convenience isn't enough. Sunday, I drove to Daniel's house. His BMW sat in the driveway, freshly washed. I knocked, and he answered in golf clothes, clearly about to leave. I don't have time for a talk, Dad. I'm not here to talk. I held out the envelope. Open this whenever you're ready. Or don't. That's your choice. He took it, frowning. What is this? Something I should have written a long time ago. I walked back to my car, started the engine, and pulled away. In the rearview mirror, I saw him standing on his porch, staring at the envelope. Then he turned and tossed it through his car window into the glove box. Some seeds take years to grow. The rebuild site became my new routine. Tuesday and Thursday evenings, Saturday mornings. My body protested the first few weeks, muscles remembering movements they'd forgotten. But gradually, strength returned. Purpose returned. Carlos, the site foreman, approached me after 3 weeks. Walter, you're good at this. Real good. We need someone to mentor the younger volunteers, teach them proper technique. Would you consider a part-time paid position? Paid? Not much. 20 hours a week, minimum wage. But you'd be building the next generation of builders. I shook his hand. When do I start? That night, I called Ellen. Can you add something to the trust? A requirement for volunteer work hours. How many hours are we talking? I thought about Daniel's text about efficiency and ROI. 500. Verified. At the rebuild site. Ellen was quiet for a moment. Walter, that's significant. Are you sure? I'm absolutely sure. The letter arrived on official law firm stationery. You are invited to attend a reading and discussion of the estate plan of Walter James Hensley. Ellen had prepared carefully. The invite list included Pastor Jim, Carlos, Olivia, 2 of my Minty volunteers, Daniel and Vanessa, and several cousins I still exchange Christmas cards with. This isn't typical, Ellen explained when we met to finalize details. Most people don't do living estate readings. But you want clarity, and this provides it. I want everyone to understand my choices while I'm still here to explain them. Daniel's response came within an hour. Finally. Let's sort the assets like adults. Assets, not memories, not legacy. Assets. Ellen scheduled it for the following Thursday at 2 o'clock. A week away. 7 days to prepare for the conversation I'd been avoiding for years. I spent that week walking through my house, placing small labels on furniture and belongings. Not prices, stories. Grandfather clock, built by Catherine's father in 1952. Tool chest, my first carpentry purchase, 1985. Wedding china, service for 12, never used all at once. Each label was a reminder. These were never just things. Wednesday night, I set up my old video camera, the one I'd used to record Daniel's childhood birthday parties. I positioned it on a tripod in my living room and pressed record. My name is Walter James Hensley. I began. I'm making this recording to explain my choices. Not to defend them, I don't need to defend them, but to help people understand. For 20 minutes, I talked about Catherine, about building this house with our own hands, about teaching Daniel carpentry when he was young and eager to learn, about watching him grow into someone I didn't quite recognize anymore. The things in this house aren't valuable because of what they cost, I said, looking directly at the camera. They're valuable because of what they represent. Work, love, time. The hours we spend building something matter more than the money we spend buying things. I showed photos. Daniel at 6, helping me frame a backyard shed. Daniel at 10, painting the porch railing. Daniel at 16, rolling his eyes at the boring manual labor. I kept insisting he learn. Somewhere along the way, I said quietly, he forgot that the best inheritance isn't what you're given. It's what you're trusted to continue. I turned off the camera, saved the file to a memory card, and sealed it in an envelope for Ellen. Thursday arrived gray and cold. I wore my good suit, the one Catherine had picked out for our 30th anniversary. Ellen's conference room filled gradually. Pastor Jim arrived first, shaking hands warmly. Carlos and 2 young volunteers, Kevin and Amber, sat together, looking nervous and confused. Olivia came with her daughter. My cousins filed in quietly. Daniel arrived 20 minutes late, Vanessa beside him. He wore an expensive suit and carried a leather portfolio. He scanned the room, his expression shifting to confusion when he saw Pastor Jim and Carlos. Why are all these people here? He asked Ellen. Because this concerns them, Ellen replied evenly. Daniel rolled his eyes at Vanessa. This should be interesting. We took our seats around the conference table. Ellen opened her folder, and the room went still. Thank you all for coming, Ellen began. Walter has asked me to walk through his estate plan while he's present to provide context. This is unusual, but not unprecedented. Walter, would you like to say anything before we begin? I looked around the table at faces old and new, familiar and unexpected. I just want everyone to understand my choices. That's all. Ellen began with the small bequests. To Pastor Jim, my complete carpentry tool set, hammers, saws, measuring instruments, everything I'd collected over 40 years. These tools build homes, churches, playgrounds, Ellen read. May they continue to build community. To Carlos, my woodworking manuals and technical books. To Kevin and Amber, my vintage tool belt and safety gear. To Olivia, Catherine's recipe box and kitchen items, for someone who understands that feeding people is how you feed souls. To the Community Rebuild nonprofit, a cash bequest of $10,000 from the truck sale. Daniel shifted in his seat, his fingers drumming the table. Each small gift seemed to irritate him more. And the house, he interrupted. Can we get to the actual assets? Ellen looked at him coolly. We're getting there, Daniel. Patience. She continued reading. To the church, $5,000 for their food pantry. To the local trade school, the scholarship endowment, already funded and permanent. This is ridiculous, Daniel muttered. He's giving away everything to strangers. They're not strangers to me, I said quietly. Ellen flipped to a new page, and her voice took on a different tone. Now we'll discuss the primary residence and residuary estate. The room went completely silent. Ellen's voice was steady and clear. The house at 428 Maple Street, along with all remaining assets including savings, investments, and personal property, will transfer to Daniel Christopher Hensley under the following conditions. Daniel leaned forward, suddenly focused. First, Ellen continued, Daniel must complete 500 documented volunteer hours at the Community Rebuild nonprofit within 12 months of Walter's passing. These hours must involve actual construction work, framing, drywall, roofing, painting. Carlos will verify completion. Daniel's face went pale, then red. You can't be serious. Second, Ellen said, ignoring him, Daniel must attend and meaningfully participate in 6 family counseling sessions with Walter. A licensed therapist will confirm attendance and engagement. This is insane, Daniel said, his voice rising. You can't put conditions on an inheritance. That's not how this works. Actually, Ellen replied calmly, incentive trusts are perfectly legal. Walter has every right to structure his estate as he chooses. And if I refuse? Daniel demanded. Ellen met his eyes. Then the house and all residuary assets will transfer immediately to the Community Rebuild Land Trust. They'll use the funds to build affordable housing for families in need. Daniel shot to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the floor. This is blackmail. You're manipulating me. I'm giving you a choice, I said quietly. One by one, the other attendees stood and quietly left the room. Pastor Jim squeezed my shoulder as he passed. Olivia gave me a small, proud smile. Carlos nodded respectfully. My cousins filed out without comment. Understanding this was between father and son. Soon, only Daniel remained standing, his face flushed with rage, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. 500 hours, he said, his voice shaking. Do you have any idea what my time is worth? Well, I could bill in 500 hours. I know exactly what it's worth, I replied. The question is whether you do. This is about punishing me, about making me grovel. This is about giving you a chance to understand what I tried to teach you when you were young. That building something with your own hands matters. That showing up matters. Vanessa tugged at his sleeve. Daniel, maybe we should. He shook her off. No, I'm not doing this. I'm not playing his games. Ellen reached into her folder and pulled out a second sealed envelope. Before you make that decision final, Walter asked me to give you this. Open it only if you choose to accept the conditions. Daniel stared at the envelope like it might bite him. Then he snatched it from Ellen's hand and tore it open. I watched Daniel's face as he read. Saw confusion shift to surprise, then to something calculating. The letter explained what Ellen and I had discovered through careful research. Behind my property ran an undeveloped corridor that the county had quietly designated for a future transit project. When that development happened, projected within 5 years, my back lot would become extremely valuable. But there was more. Years ago, I'd invested $5,000 in a small development cooperative that Carlos had started. It had seemed like a risky bet then, but the co-op had grown. My share was now worth considerably more. And if the transit corridor proceeded as planned, that 20% stake could surge to 6 figures. The letter laid it all out. Complete the hours, attend the counseling, and Daniel wouldn't just inherit a house. He'd inherit a strategic position in a developing area, plus a stake in a thriving cooperative. Refuse, and the Community Land Trust would receive everything. The house, the land, the co-op share. They'd already agreed to the terms. The paperwork was signed and filed. You planned this, Daniel said, his voice barely controlled. You set this up to force my hand. I set it up to give you options, I corrected. Real options, not the ones you thought you had. Ellen stood and walked to a laptop. There's one more thing Walter wants you to see. She opened a video file. My face filled the screen, younger, recording on the day I'd prepare my message. But Ellen skipped forward to a different section. One I'd recorded years ago and forgotten about. The footage showed Daniel at 8 years old, standing beside Catherine in our backyard. We were building a fence together, all 3 of us. Daniel was hammering nails, his face scrunched in concentration. Catherine steadied the boards while I guided his hands. Not too hard, Danny, my younger self said on the video. Steady pressure. Feel how the nail wants to go in. Young Daniel looked up at the camera, his face splitting into a huge grin. I'm building something, Daddy. Look, Catherine laughed, her voice clear and bright. You're doing great, sweetheart. Just like your father. The video continued, Daniel measuring boards, sawing carefully under my supervision, painting the finished fence with more enthusiasm than accuracy. At the end, we all stood back to admire the work. Daniel nestled between Catherine and me. "It's not perfect," young Daniel said, pointing at some crooked boards. "Nothing ever is," Catherine replied, ruffling his hair. "But it's ours. We made it together. That's what makes it beautiful." The screen went dark. Ellen closed the laptop. Daniel stood frozen, his eyes red, his jaw working, but no words coming out. Ellen pulled out one more envelope. "This was in your glove box. The letter Walter gave you 3 weeks ago. He asked me to make sure you actually read it today." She placed it on the table. Daniel picked it up slowly, his hands shaking, and began to read. Dawn came cold and wet, rain hammering the roof of the rebuild site supply shed. I sat in my truck across the street, engine off, watching volunteers trickle in despite the weather. Pastor Jim arrived first, then Carlos, then Kevin and Amber. I told Ellen I wouldn't interfere, that Daniel's choice had to be his own, that I'd stay away from the site for the first month if he decided to show up. But I couldn't help myself. Not today. Not for this. At 6:45, a silver BMW pulled up. Daniel climbed out wearing new work boots, jeans, and an old sweatshirt I recognized, one I'd given him a decade ago that I'd assumed he'd thrown away. He stood in the rain for a long moment, staring at the half-built house frame. Carlos approached him, extending a hand. They talked briefly. Then Carlos handed him a hammer and pointed toward a stack of lumber. Daniel picked up his first board. His hands shook as he positioned it. The first nail took 3 attempts. The second went in straighter. By the third, he'd found a rhythm. Pastor Jim appeared beside him, showing him how to check for square. Kevin and Amber worked nearby, occasionally glancing over with cautious acceptance. An hour passed, then 2. Daniel's shoulders stopped shaking. His movements became steadier. At one point, he set down his hammer and pressed his palms against his eyes, his whole body trembling. Then he picked the hammer back up and kept working. Olivia knocked on my truck window, startling me. She held 2 thermoses of coffee and a knowing smile. "You're not as sneaky as you think," she said, climbing into the passenger seat. We sat together, watching my son build something with his own hands for the first time in 20 years. The rain eased. The sun broke through clouds. The house frame took shape board by board. The will reading made him the only one standing in that room, Olivia said quietly. "But this is what makes him stand for something." I nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in my throat. At noon, Daniel looked up from his work and scanned the street. For a moment, his eyes landed on my truck. He couldn't possibly see me through the tinted windows and rain-streaked glass, but his shoulders straightened and something like understanding crossed his face. Then he turned back to the house and picked up another board. I started my engine and drove away, leaving my son to build his inheritance one nail at a time. The path to what he'd really wanted and what he'd actually needed had finally begun the right way.